The air in Blackwood Manor tasted like dust and dead flowers. It was the first thing that hit me, heavier than the oppressive silence of the 100-year-old house I now owned. Great Aunt Sylvia, the eccentric recluse, had finally died, leaving me everything. I knew nothing about her except that she hated sunshine and liked to collect antique music boxes. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, looked nervous when he handed me the heavy iron key. "The will has one unusual clause, Miss Hayes," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Room 12 on the 3rd floor. You must not enter it for 7 nights. It is to remain locked until the 8th dawn." I laughed it off. An old woman's final dramatic flourish, a quirky rule for a quirky house. I took the key, its weight cold in my palm. The first 3 nights were silent. I slept poorly, convinced every creak in the floorboards was a visitor. The house was enormous, a labyrinth of shadows and expensive heavy furniture. Room 12 was easy to find. It stood apart, a black oak door at the end of a long, dark corridor. It had no handle, only a massive, ancient bolt lock. I could feel the cold radiating from the wood when I touched it. It happened on the 4th night, exactly 3 a.m. I know the time because the grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour just before it started. The sound was not a moan, nor a whisper, but a fully formed, agonizing scream. A woman's voice, pure terror mixed with absolute despair. It sliced through the thick walls and straight into my chest. I froze in bed, heart slamming against my ribs. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then, silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I didn't move until sunrise. I tried to rationalize it. Old pipes. A draft through the chimney. A very loud, dying cat. Anything but the truth that something human, something profoundly suffering, was trapped inside my inherited house. I called the estate manager, pretending I was worried about structural integrity. He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Old Sylvia was a character, Miss Hayes. Probably left the radio on a timer. But the scream wasn't mechanical. It was raw. It felt present. The 5th night I was ready. I sat on the landing outside room 12, wrapped in a thick blanket, holding a flashlight and my phone. I didn't wait long. At 3 a.m. exactly, the scream came again. It wasn't the same scream. This one was higher pitched, a crescendo of pure anguish that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. This time I heard a sound beneath the scream, a rhythmic clicking like a recording starting. But why would she record that? Why play it every night? My fingers fumbled with the key. I shoved it into the heavy iron lock. It was a tight fit. The mechanism groaned. But just as the tumblers began to turn, the scream cut out. The clicking stopped. Silence returned. I yanked the key out, my hand shaking violently. I felt like I had just interrupted a ritual. The next day I started digging through Aunt Sylvia's records. I found old newspaper clippings. Sylvia hadn't just been eccentric, she had been famous. A celebrated opera singer, renowned for her dramatic soprano voice. She toured the world in the 1960s and 70s. Then, around 1980, she vanished, retired instantly, without explanation, moving into Blackwood Manor and never leaving. The articles hinted at a massive scandal or a nervous breakdown. I found a photograph of Sylvia with a handsome, stern-looking man, her husband Thomas. He died 10 years before she did, leaving her the house. On the back, in Thomas's neat script, "Our greatest work will always be kept hidden, my dove." Hidden. In room 12. I went back to the room during the day. The sunlight filtering through the window at the end of the hall did nothing to warm the air. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Just the faint metallic scent of age and cold iron. I noticed something else this time. A tiny seam running around the door frame that didn't look like simple wear. It looked sealed. Professionally. I called Mr. Abernathy again. "Tell me about room 12, I demanded. His voice immediately cooled. It was Sylvia's sanctuary, Miss Hayes. She had a special soundproofed recording studio installed there before her retirement. She forbade anyone from disturbing it. A soundproofed studio, perfect for recording a magnificent voice, or agonizing screams. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. I felt a chilling wave wash over me. If it was soundproofed, how was I hearing the screams so clearly? The sound had to be escaping through the ventilation, or worse, through a deliberate speaker system outside the room. But why? Why record and amplify pure terror? The sixth night, I didn't wait on the landing. I set up my phone to record and retreated to the library 2 floors below. I wanted distance. 3 a.m. The clock chimed. The scream started. It was worse than before, longer, more desperate. This time I heard a word clearly embedded in the shriek. Thomas. Thomas, her dead husband. He wasn't just recording her voice. He was recording her death, or her madness. And he had set it up to play every single night at the same hour. A macabre alarm clock meant to torment anyone who dared occupy the house. But why mandate that the door remain locked for 7 nights? It was a countdown, a final, cruel test. I couldn't wait until the 8th day. The thought of hearing that horror one more time was unbearable. I needed to know what lay beyond that heavy, silent door. I needed to silence that scream forever. I grabbed a crowbar from the utility room. The clock ticked toward 3:15 a.m. I rushed back up the stairs, the iron key clutched in one hand, the crowbar heavy in the other. I was no longer afraid of ghosts. I was afraid of the human capacity for cruelty that lay behind that door. I reached room 12. The scream was still echoing, though beginning to fade. I shoved the key in, twisted it hard, and felt the lock finally yield with a sickening thunk. But the door still wouldn't budge. I saw why. The seal was fresh putty. Someone had sealed it recently after Sylvia's death. The lawyer, Abernathy, or someone else who knew the secret. I rammed the crowbar into the seam. The wood splintered. The scream stopped abruptly. Silence. And then, a sound that made my blood run cold. A distinct wet thump from inside the room, followed by the faint sound of rattling chains. The iron key was still warm in my hand. The door had been sealed, not just locked. Someone desperately wanted whatever was inside to remain hidden. I pushed the crowbar deeper into the jam, leveraging my weight against the solid oak. Wood cracked, dust flew, and the air pressure shifted, pulling the stench of stale, metallic air out into the hall. With a final agonizing, splintering sound, the seal broke. The door swung inward. The room was pitch black, no windows. The air was thick, suffocating. I aimed the flashlight inside. It wasn't a recording studio, not primarily. It was a small, sparsely furnished bedroom. A cot, a chamber pot, a single chair. Against the far wall, a bank of heavy bolted-down equipment, reel-to-reel tape decks, amplifiers, and industrial-grade speakers. This was the source of the sound. The speakers were facing the wall, amplified to ensure the sound leaked even through the soundproofing. But the room was not empty. Sitting on the cot facing the wall was a person. Thin, frail, draped in a white sheet. A shock of pure white hair obscured their face. They were humming, a low, tuneless drone. My flashlight beam trembled. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly loud. The figure turned slowly. It wasn't Aunt Sylvia. It was a man, elderly, with sunken eyes and Thomas's handsome, severe features, only aged and ravaged by time. He looked directly at me and smiled, a terrifyingly serene expression. "It's about time you came, Elara," he said. His voice was steady, calm. "The song is over now." I stepped back, dropping the crowbar. "Who are you? Where is my aunt?" "Sylvia has been free for 10 years, he replied, slowly rising from the cot. "I am Thomas, her husband, and her biggest admirer." I stared. Thomas was supposed to have died a decade ago. I had seen the death certificate. The death certificate was a formality. He chuckled, shuffling toward the massive equipment bank. Sylvia was dying. We knew she wouldn't last. But her voice, her agony, that was priceless. I couldn't let it go. He pointed to the tape deck. She was trying to sing a new piece, her final masterpiece, but the cancer took her voice. What you heard every night was her final, desperate attempt to hit the high note. Pure, unadulterated suffering. I recorded it, and I played it every night, at the hour she usually practiced. It was a beautiful tribute. But why the locked door? Why play it for 7 nights? "The will," Thomas said, tapping a finger on a loose floorboard near the amplifier. Sylvia was brilliant. She knew I would try to maintain the illusion. The rule was a test. Anyone who broke the rule and silenced the scream would find her true legacy. He knelt and pried up the floorboard. Beneath it was a worn, leather-bound book, not a diary but a ledger. "The screams were meant to keep people out," Thomas explained, his voice becoming manic. "To make them believe the house was cursed, that Sylvia was trapped mad. But the truth is, the screams were a distraction from the real treasure. This ledger. The ledger wasn't full of bank accounts. It was a complex, coded record of every performance, every piece of jewelry, and every secret favor Sylvia had ever received from world leaders, royalty, and titans of industry during her peak career. The value was astronomical, scattered across hidden vaults worldwide. She hid the clues within the structure of her final failed composition, Thomas revealed, eyes glittering. The pitch, the tempo, the cadence of the screams, they form a key. She was singing the coordinates and passcodes to her true fortune in her final moments. I couldn't decode it all before she died, so I was using the recordings to finish the job. The 7 days was my grace period before the lawyers took inventory. I looked at Thomas, the man who had faked his own death, imprisoned himself in a dark room, and tormented anyone in the house with the recorded suffering of his dead wife, all for a hidden fortune. He was mad, consumed by the legacy he couldn't decipher. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. I looked down at the sound equipment. The final tape was still threaded. On the spool, a single word was written in Sylvia's shaky hand. Silence. Thomas lunged for the ledger. I reacted instinctively, shoving the heavy amplifier with all my strength. It toppled onto the reel-to-reel deck, crushing it. The fragile tape snapped and shredded. The sound of Sylvia's final despair was destroyed forever. Thomas screamed, a sound far more human and defeated than any recording. You fool, you destroyed the key. The whole fortune. I didn't regret it. I had silenced the suffering. Whether it was a priceless key or a final act of cruelty, it was over. The police arrived shortly after. Mr. Abernathy, it turned out, had noticed the unusual large cash withdrawal Thomas had made 10 years ago, and had been quietly monitoring the manor. He admitted he sealed the door after Sylvia's death, ensuring the rule was followed, hoping the distraction would protect Thomas until he figured out the codes. Thomas was arrested. The ledger, while complex, was enough evidence to freeze assets and begin the long, complicated process of recovering Sylvia's true inheritance. I never did recover all the fortune. It was too vast, too scattered, too encoded in the madness of two brilliant, twisted people. But I sold Blackwood Manor, and with the recovered assets, I bought a small, sunny house near the ocean. I kept one thing from room 12, the tiny, fractured spool of tape labeled Silence. I look at it sometimes. The trauma of those screams will always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind polished wood and antique furniture. But more importantly, it taught me that freedom isn't found in a locked room or an inherited house. Freedom is the courage to confront the screams, even if they are your own. And sometimes, the most profound act of love and healing is simply choosing to turn the machine off, to choose silence, and to finally start living in the light.